works in this area with me and worked on some of the calculations that we will go across in this presentation. So I'll start off, and yeah, as Deanna said, we'll have some like a break in the middle and a break at the end for sort of questions and a bit of discussion. As we go along, if you've got a sort of clarification type question, pop it in the chat, and we can sort of deal with them as they come up. Otherwise, we'll leave them for those Q&A sessions so that we stay on time. So just a tiny bit about Renew first. We're a community-based organisation that's been around for a bit over 40 years. We're all about sort of helping people live more sustainably in their homes and communities. We do that in lots of different ways, including some magazines that we publish, and we also do direct advice to sort of households and people, as well as governments, businesses, and also policymakers around energy and other sustainability issues. The focus for today is solar and batteries. It's something that people are very interested about and that people have all sorts of questions, like the questions up here on the screen. And we're going to try to sort of cover off these questions sort of briefly, but with enough information to get you maybe one or two steps ahead of where you're at now. And as I said, yeah, pop questions in the chat. We can deal with them in the Q&A bits at the end. And if we get too many, we can always sort of, you know, I can always respond to questions and send them out. They can be shared with you later. But there's so much information out there. And the main issue a lot of people have with solar and batteries is what? I don't know enough. I don't understand. And that's what we're really trying to do here, is give you more information to help you sort of make better choices and understand what you're doing if you want to go down those paths. But what we always do first when we talk to people about solar and batteries is we go, before you even think about it, there's a couple of other basic things that you need to look at first. And one of them is, you know, what electricity deal are you on now? Because solar and batteries is about being better for the environment by being lower emission energy, as well as saving money. And one of the basic things around saving money is, what are you paying for electricity that you buy anyway? And there's quite a few websites around that help you find a better cost energy supplier. The two that we recommend, one is the Victorian government's one, Victoria Energy Compare. And the other one is called Whatever. They're a private one, but we think they're pretty good. They look at all the retailers, and these are really great places to start to find out, am I paying too much for electricity? Because we just really don't know much about prices and are we getting a good deal or not. So they're really worth checking out to get an idea of your energy contract that you're on at the moment. And then the other thing that we think people really need to think about is what's in your house, because your energy cost is not just your price, but it's also how much you use. And a big part of that is the energy efficiency of your appliances. When you get new appliances, it's always really worth it to look at the energy performance. Sometimes the higher efficient ones are a bit more expensive to buy, but they're usually so much cheaper to run that you actually make the money back within a year or two. So that's really important to look at. And also, if you own a house, you know, think about, you know, what have you got for ceiling insulation and drafts? They're really important things in a house that affect your energy usage, especially for heating, but also for cooling. So that's the 2-minute on what to do first. So now I'm going to talk about solar, and you might see it called solar PV. PV stands for photovoltaic, which is just a technology that solar panels use to turn sunlight into electricity. We try to use the term solar PV just to distinguish between other forms of solar energy. There's you might have seen solar hot water systems on the roofs of houses. They use a different type of technology to turn sunlight into energy. So that's why we talk about solar PV, to specifically mean solar panels. How do they work? It's actually pretty simple. They're on your roof, the sun hits them, they generate electricity. That goes, you can see in the little diagram, sun hitting, and it goes down that red wire to a device called the inverter, which basically turns it into usable electricity for your house. There's a bit more complicated than that, but that's really all you really need to know. And then from the inverter, it goes to your switchboard. That's your regular switchboard where you've got your, you know, circuit breakers and your electricity meter. And then from the switchboard, it goes to your appliances that use electricity, your television, your fridge, other stuff. Of course, at the other side of the switchboard is the electricity grid, the poles and wires down the street. That's where you buy energy from when you're not generating solar. And when you are generating solar and you've got more than you can use, you send the rest out to the grid, other people use it, and you get paid what they call a feed-in tariff for that. 23% of Australian houses this year have solar panels. It goes up every year. It's huge. And you get a good return for the investment in two ways. One is by selling that excess energy to the grid for the feed-in tariff, and the other is actually by using the energy yourself. And that's a good point to think about, because this is a typical household usage. This is like a graph where the higher the curve is, the more electricity you're using. For a typical household that is out during the day, maybe at work and school, you use more in that morning and evening than in the middle of the day. In the middle of the day, your fridge is running, other stuff is running that's in your house. But you sort of use most when you're cooking and using heaters and watching televisions, etc. Obviously, for people who are home during the day, they've got a higher bit in the middle because they're using energy more consistently during the day. Solar generation happens in the middle of the day. So as you can see in this chart, that yellow bit under the blue line is what you get to use in your house from what you generate, and the pale yellow bit above the line is all the extra that ends up getting sent to the grid. And that's sort of the equation of solar, and we'll go into a bit later ways that you can actually maximize the solar that you generate to get more value from it, because you get more value from it by using it directly than by selling it to the grid, because you pay more for what you buy than for what you export. Why get solar? People have different reasons. One of them is the environment. Solar PV's emission-free electricity that you use, and that goes out in the grid for others to use. Some people are concerned about, well, how much energy is used to make the solar panels, and how do you count that? Yeah, it's true. The solar panel takes about the first 1 to 2 years of its life to sort of generate the energy that was used to make it. After that, it's generating more energy than was used to make it, and it's a net gain of zero emission energy into your house, into your community. The other thing that people get solar panels for is to save money, because you're getting that free electricity and you're getting that payment for what you export. This is the analysis that my colleague AJ has done, and we sort of update this every year because the prices and everything change quite a bit. You don't need to understand every nuance of this chart. Basically, the big question a lot of people have is, if I'm spending a few $1,000s on solar panels, how long until I've earned that back through the benefit of having it? And that's the analysis that we do. We look at the price of the feed-in tariff. We look at how much energy typical households use. We look at how much was the system to buy, what was any discounts or rebates that were available. We'll get into those a bit later. And this is basically, 4 to 6 years payback is pretty typical for a typical house. And this analysis is based on a house that has gas and electricity connected. If you have an all-electric house with no gas, you'll actually pay back your solar quicker, because pay back your system quicker because you use more electricity. And the more that you use, especially during the day, the quicker it pays back, because you're saving money. Generally, the larger systems take a bit longer to pay back because they cost more, but the value that you can get for them over the life of them is higher as well. We've got the ones on the left there are typical small, medium and large homes. The ones on the right are new homes. We put that in there because there's a lot of benefits to putting solar on a new house, and especially if you go all electric, have no gas connection, because then your solar can power all of your appliances, including the appliances that might otherwise be powered by gas. And this analysis shows that, if you go all electric, then you pay off your solar system effectively about a year sooner, because of that extra electricity that you're using. And this is just a quick one. Solar panels are getting cheaper all the time. This chart is for the last sort of 10 years, like they've, halved in price over the last 10 years, pretty more than halved in price. They keep on getting cheaper. They're going to hit the floor at some point, but every year we find the payback rates are quicker and quicker. Sometimes they level off a bit because other things change, but there's the decline in price of solar systems has really made them accessible to a lot more people. Of course, you still need to own a house to do it. I want to talk quickly about rebates, because there can be a bit of confusion about this. There are sort of two main forms of rebates or subsidies for solar panels. One of them is a Commonwealth government program called small technology certificates. That's part of the renewable energy target. And this is basically a scheme where, you know, we have a renewable energy target. We have an incentive system in place for energy businesses to use or generate more renewable electricity. When companies sell you solar panels, they can claim these certificates because they're making more renewable electricity happen by installing solar panels. And it typically takes around a third of the price off a solar system. And when you buy solar panels, the business who sold you the solar panels and who installs them, they basically deduct that price really before during the sale process. So usually the price they give you is the price that already has that deducted. And so you don't really need to do anything about it. It happens sort of automatically. And it makes quite a difference. Like I said, it's about a third of the cost of the whole thing. It applies to other appliances such as certain hot water systems and small wind or hydro systems, but it's for households, it's mainly of value for solar, as well as for some of those hot water systems. The other rebate that is good to know about is the Victorian government solar homes rebate. This is a different type of one that's paid, it's the government money paying you a discount because they're trying to encourage solar installations. Not everybody's eligible. There's some eligibility criteria up there on the screen. About 80 to 90% of Victorians are eligible. It gives you almost $2,000 off the cost of a solar system after that federal rebate has already been applied. That's what's really made solar cheap in Victoria for the last couple of years. Now the value of that rebate is going to go down a bit over time, but it's really been significant in making it a lot more affordable. And there's also a scheme for renters, rental properties to access the rebate as well through the landlord organises it. And it's a bit more complicated, but there's information on that website, solar.vic.gov.au, all about these rebates for solar panels. And the other thing to keep in mind is that as part of the program, you can also get an interest-free loan for the same amount. So that can really further lower your cost of getting a solar system. The Solar Victoria also has some other rebates, one for heat pump or solar hot water systems, which is a $1,000 rebate. And the other one is for batteries, which is a $4,000 rebate. They've all got conditions, and you can only get one out of these three rebates: the solar panel, the battery, and the hot water. You can actually only get one as a household. So you sort of pick the one that suits you. So people who've already got solar might go for the battery rebate or the hot water rebate. People who haven't got solar probably would go for the solar rebate unless they want to install solar first and then get a battery. But we're going to talk about batteries in a bit. I feel like I'm racing pretty quickly, so do drop questions in the chat if necessary.
Yeah, we have one question, Dean.
Yeah, the one about the fit. I'm actually about to go on to the fit, and yeah, that's a good question. So I'll actually go through my next two slides and then answer that question, because the first slide is what is a feed-in tariff, and that's basically when you export to the grid for your unused solar, you get paid money for that energy that you exported to the grid, because your energy retailer basically uses that energy and sells it to others of their customers. So that's what the feed-in tariff is, money that you get paid for excess that you export. And as Gary noted, the feed-in tariff has gone down quite a bit over the years. And you know, but in the around 2010, there was a premium feed-in tariff of 60 cents a kilowatt hour. That's pretty big subsidy. That's much more really than the energy value in the market. And the purpose of that scheme was really to encourage early adopters to get solar and to help actually strengthen the industry by giving those early adopters enough sort of return that would make the systems worthwhile. And you know, those three blue ones, which went down from sort of 60 cents to sort of 25 cents roughly, really did serve the purpose of getting a whole lot of probably slightly wealthier homeowners to get solar on and help to build the industry so big that we saw those price falls that we've had. Since 2013, in Victoria, the feed-in tariff has been regulated by the government and based on the actual value of the energy in the market. And as Gary said, it sort of has gone down, it's sort of gone up and down a bit. the main reason it's gone down is because there's so much solar that there's more energy in the middle of the day than is really needed. So it's worth less. That's the reality of it. And that's why it's really important these days to work out how can I use most of my solar myself, whether that's through shifting loads in my house or batteries, which we'll get to a bit later. The other question people ask about feed-in tariffs is, if the retailer sells energy at 25 cents, why do they buy it off me at 6 cents or 10 cents? Shouldn't they be paying me the same amount? And the answer to that is sort of not really, because the feed-in tariff is like a wholesale price, and the price they sell it to you is a retail price that includes lots of other costs, such as the cost of running a business and fees that they have to pay, and all sorts of other stuff. So the analogy I sort of use is, if you grew tomatoes in your garden and you took them to Coles, you wouldn't be able to sell them to Coles at the same price that they sell tomatoes for. They'd buy tomatoes off you at the lower price that they pay their suppliers for. That's sort of the analogy for the feed-in tariff. There's lots of different views about whether it's fair or not. At Renew, we've done a bit of analysis of the Victorian feed-in tariff, and we're pretty confident that it's pretty fair. And we also think it's going to change more over time, as I think there's really a move to make it a sort of time variant, so that at times of the day when the energy is more valuable, you'd get a higher feed-in tariff. That's sort of coming in the future, I think, more and more, probably for the energy that you buy as well as the energy that you export. But the main message there is, don't rely on the feed-in tariff to get value from your solar. It's a good bonus, but the best value is to actually use it. Choosing a solar supplier. Look, there's so many out there in the market now. If you get the Victorian rebate, that $1,850 discount that's available, you need to get the criteria for that rebate is a solar retailer who's approved by the Clean Energy Council and is in their approved solar retailer scheme. We always recommend people get solar installers who are approved by the CEC as retailers, because they've agreed to a code of conduct that's sort of is a bit of a higher standard than sort of what the basic Australian consumer law requires, in terms of giving you good analysis, good information, and numerous other things that just make them like, giving a better customer service rather than the most basic customer service. So, and if they do the wrong thing, there's a process with the Clean Energy Council where you can report them and it can get addressed. So, it's like a lot of industry sort of excellence type schemes. They've signed up to it. They've agreed to the code of conduct to behave better in the market than the average. So we always recommend that. But it's not the be all and end all. If you've got friends and neighbors who've had really good experiences with an installer, that's also worth checking out. Also look at warranties. Warranties are important. Stuff goes wrong, you want to know that they've got your back. And that's really important to look at in conjunction with a quote that you might get. And we always recommend people get several quotes, never just get one quote, because it's really hard to benchmark the cost with one quote. You might see on the internet sometimes, a system this size should cost sort of this much, but that can vary a bit according to the particular house and the particular location and a few other things. So it's really worth it to get a few quotes. And there's a couple of websites. I forgot to change the slide. There's a couple of websites up there that actually show you some good websites that can give you some good choice of retailers to get quotes from. The other thing that you can do is get some independent advice, and Renew has an energy consult specifically to give energy households independent advice on buying a solar system or batteries or energy efficient appliances. We can look at what you're being offered, what you're looking for, and recommend size of system and things to look out for, help you find the right supplier. There's other organizations that do this sort of thing too. I think the Energy Foundation and the Australian Energy Foundation do some of this sort of stuff too. It's always good to get some independent advice, which is where, talking to friends or neighbors who've also got solar before is very helpful. When we do energy consults, interestingly, the sort of questions that we get from people who want us to talk to them about solars is, I want to go off grid. Tell me how I can go off grid. Or I just don't want to have to pay my retailer 1 cent anymore. I want to be completely energy independent, and I want batteries so I can use all my solar energy and not have to buy it off the grid, and use the full value of my solar. They're very common questions from people, and what we sort of look at, we sort of take one step back and we go, how much a year do you spend on total energy, not just electricity, gas, wood, LPG, etc. What appliances have you got? How old are they? How efficient are they? How do you use them? What are the most important things for you? Are you mainly trying to lower cost? Are you mainly trying to benefit the environment? Are you mainly looking for a backup to stop, being, if there's an electricity brownout or blackout? People have all sorts of different questions. And if you're a renter, have you had a chat with your landlord and seen if they're interested in installing solar panels? We've seen several situations where landlords have been really keen to install solar panels on their rental properties. So these are the sort of questions that we ask, and this really helps to shape that conversation about what's the best thing that I need to meet my needs. And often that means don't go off grid, stay on the grid, because that means you can share your unneeded energy with your neighbors and put more renewable energy out there into the world. And sometimes it's, well, maybe don't get a battery because, yeah, it does let you use more of your solar yourself, but it's pretty expensive. And it often actually works better to export what you don't use and then buy a bit from the grid when you need it. And that's the sort of stuff that good independent analysis can show you. So we really recommend that. And yeah, as I showed the chart before, all this generation happens when, for a lot of households, they're not really using it. So figure out what you can do. Can you run more appliances during the day? Can you use electric hot water and use your solar energy to heat water? It's like a battery, except it's actually water. Can you use your air conditioning and heating a bit more efficiently and pre-cool or preheat during the day so that you need to use it a bit less afterwards? These are all the sorts of things that we talk about when we do consults, and they're good questions to think about, because the more you can use during the day, even if you're not home, the better off you are.
Dean, we have a couple of questions.
Yep, let's do that now, because this is
okay to, yeah.
Yep.
The first one from Gary, who's needing to leave quite shortly, so I hope he's still there. Gary's asked, what are the costs of getting a battery, and can he get a rebate? And what batteries are best to suit a Fronius inverter? And he says, I believe Tesla are plug and play.
Yeah, okay. We do have some numbers on the batteries later in the presentation, which is I actually might, let me think. The battery rebate is really,
he's got to go. So
yep. Hey, if AJ's there, AJ, do you want to jump in on the battery cost and the Fronius inverter question? I think AJ is not there.
Hayden, can you please repeat that?
Okay, we've got a question which is what a typical cost for a battery and what batteries best suit a Fronius inverter? Do you have any insights into those?
Yeah, just give me a sec. There's actually a list by the Victorian government in terms of which battery modules are kind of certified for the rebate. So when you go to the Solar Victoria website, you can actually download an Excel file that has a list of all the different batteries along with all the inverters that are suitable for them. And you'll also see what is the kilowatt hour capacity of those batteries. So that way you'll see all the batteries that are compatible with Fronius in that Excel sheet. I can share the link. We can share the link later if someone has specific questions.
Yeah, we can share the link and we'll email it out to people who've attended.
Yeah,
right.
That's fine. We can do that.
We'll send out the presentation as well, so it's got information in there. Yeah, and Tesla's plug and play. I think Teslas are pretty much plug and play, AJ, Tesla batteries?
Yeah, they are. They have their own inverter. Which means you don't necessarily need to have a hybrid inverter. Once you are solar, at any point, you can just integrate Tesla power bank, Tesla Powerwall at any point in your house.
This has been one of the changes over the last few years. It used to be that you really had to very carefully get the right inverter for the right battery, and it's less important now because batteries are more designed to be able to be plugged in later. It's always still worth asking your installer, is this inverter good for connecting the battery later if you're thinking about a battery? Yeah. Okay, other questions?
Oh, yeah. The next one from Russell. Are we going to pay the distributors anytime soon for sending the power back to the grid?
Yeah, that's been in the news a bit lately. That's a rule change in the national energy market that covers a whole lot of stuff, not just the question of whether people might be required to pay for exporting surplus solar energy. And part of that rule change is actually requirements for distributors, which is the network business, to actually better support solar exports in the first place. It puts performance requirements on distributors handling solar exports, requires them to basically do more, take more effort to make sure that people can integrate their solar panels with the grid. So yeah, look, probably in the future at some point, there will be fees for customers exporting energy to the grid at certain times and above certain amounts. And that's really all about balancing the stability of the grid. Sometimes there's too much solar exports and it actually makes the grid unstable if they all go in. So that's in the future, that'll be when we'll need to actually discourage solar exports at that time. And at other times, the grid might really want those solar exports. And part of that proposal that's happening at the moment is that sometimes people might be charged a small fee if they really want to export. Other times they might be paid if they can export because that energy is needed. So it's a bit more complicated than some of the talk in the media has been, and it's a process that's still ongoing. So the short answer, the main answer really is, we're used to thinking of our houses and our solar systems and everything and batteries, whatever we have, as our own thing. And increasingly it's a community thing. We need to coordinate with our neighbors and with other people to make sure that we're all working together to use the energy system most effectively for the benefit of all of us. That's sort of the big question, the big place that we're heading towards. Yeah. I hope that answers the question. I can see the questions now. The question about...
sorry, I was just going to say there are more questions, but do you want to keep going or do you want to continue with your presentation?
Yeah, look, and the questions about payback for batteries, that's coming up. So I will do that. I'm just seeing there's one question, is the feed-in tariff at the discretion of the provider or locked in? That's a good question. It depends. In Victoria, there's a minimum feed-in tariff that's determined by the regulator that's based on the wholesale value of the energy in the market during the time that solar exports. Retailers have to offer a feed-in tariff at least that amount. They have the discretion to offer a higher feed-in tariff, and they might do that for their own reasons. They've got the discretion to offer a more complicated feed-in tariff, maybe with different time periods. But there is a basic regulated minimum that they have to do in Victoria. We're lucky because in other states, it's not like that. In other states, it's really a bit of a free-for-all. Though in those states, feed-in tariffs mostly are pretty much set at that wholesale value, because it's a bit of a myth that retailers don't want people having solar panels. It's actually good for retailers to have people with solar panels. It gives them extra energy in the grid that they don't need to buy in the market and take a risk on, predicting how much they need. So they actually quite like it. And that's why you see some retailers offering very high feed-in tariffs, because it's worth it to them to even lose a bit of money on the deal to have that energy sort of at hand when they might need it. So yeah, it's an interesting area, feed-in tariffs and retailers and what they think about them. But yeah, look, we will move on because the next part is about batteries. And I know a lot of people are interested in batteries. So we're going to go a bit into what batteries are and how they work, and then a bit into the economics of batteries and are they worth it for you, which is a bit of a more complicated question than it used to be. Going back to our little diagram, we've got the solar panels, getting the sunlight, turn it into electricity, going to the inverter. We already went over this before. But you can see there's an extra thing on this diagram, which is the battery. Any energy that you don't use goes into the battery. So the energy still powers your television and your fridge and everything first. But when you've got a battery, instead of going out to the grid for the feed-in tariff, it goes into your battery, charges your battery. And only when the battery is full does any more excess go back out into the grid. That's how a battery makes a difference. It basically lets you save up excess energy to the quantity that the battery can hold before exporting it, so you can then use it later. That's the basic principle of batteries. And it works seamlessly, it just works automatically with it. You know, once it's set up right, you don't have to do anything. You know, use electricity, powers your television, goes into the battery, and then the rest goes out. So, you know, it's the same thing. We're going back to this chart, all that excess, the amount we use, the amount we don't. When you've got a battery, see a whole bunch of the excess actually goes into the battery, and then just the rest goes out. That's the opportunity that batteries offer, to save that extra energy yourself to use directly. Why would you want a battery? There's a lot of reasons that people have. And one of them is that simple one about just saving the extra energy to use later. One is to use it a bit more strategically to avoid using energy at peak times. That can help the grid. It might also be a saving if you're on a tariff that costs more at peak times. Some people are interested in a thing called tariff arbitrage, where they're on a time variant tariff where the price for electricity is different at different times of day, and I'll buy it from the grid cheaply and put in the battery, and then they spit it back out into the grid later when they get paid more for it. That's a bit complicated, and I don't know many people who really want to do that, but some do. If you're really keen to sort of get involved in the energy market and try and make some benefit from variable prices, that's one thing you can do. For a lot of people, it's about having electricity when there's a blackout. Probably less so in the middle of the city, and probably more so on the fringe or in regional areas. There's certainly some parts of outer Melbourne that where the grid is a bit less reliable and blackouts are more frequent. Batteries are great for that, and that's an example where the battery might be worth more than just the monetary value of the energy that it saves, because having energy when there's a blackout might be worth more to you than just what the energy would have cost to buy. And if you do get a battery for blackout protection, you need to make sure you've got the right sort of battery, the right sort of inverter, and set up the right way so it works that way. Because one thing a lot of people don't realize is that in a standard installation of a solar system, if there's a blackout, your solar system also stops working and you're still blacked out. And that's a safety thing, because if there's a blackout and there's people working on the lines and your solar system is still pumping out a whole lot of electricity, that's dangerous for the people working on the lines. And that's why you need a bit more expensive inverter with a special feature in it called an anti-islanding that allows electricity to stay in your house but doesn't export it out to the grid during a blackout. And it's a bit more complicated. It costs a bit more. If blackout energy is important to you, then it's probably worth the money. Yeah, energy independence. People like just knowing that they rely less on those big bad energy retailers. And a lot of people, like the early adopters of solar panels who spent $20,000 or $30,000 on small solar systems, they want to support the development of new technology. It helps to build the industry, it makes it cheaper. And that's a really good service that people who are investing in batteries now are doing. They're paying quite a bit because batteries are quite expensive. They're helping to build up the industry so that batteries will be cheaper in the future. And the last thing that people would like to do is go off grid, not be connected at all, be completely energy independent. That's more common in regional areas, but there are some people in the city who do it too. I would argue that it's not really worth it financially to do it, especially in the city. But some people like to do it anyway because that's what they want to do. So good for them. Again, they're helping to build up that industry. To do the lowdown on batteries, we need to do a bit of techie stuff on Energy 101. And this is really just to understand the difference between kilowatts and kilowatt hours. These are just units like centimeters or inches that are used to measure electricity. So it doesn't matter what they actually mean. But the thing that is good to understand is how they differ from each other, because people often get them mixed up. And the way I like to think about it is kilowatts is power. It's like strength or water pressure. Solar panels measured in kilowatts, that's how much they can generate instantaneously. When a 5 kilowatt solar system will generate 5 kilowatts of energy at a moment in time when the sun is shining perfectly and all the conditions are perfect. From appliances are measured in kilowatts. You know, a 1.8 kilowatt heater uses 1.8 kilowatts of power when it's operating. Kilowatt hours is a measure of energy. It's more like an amount. So to use a water analogy, it's like liters. And I think that helps to understand kilowatts of water pressure, kilowatt hours are liters. That's the amount of water that you have. It's the amount of electricity that you have. And to help to show how that works in practice, there's a 5 kilowatt solar system. That's how much power that can generate in the ideal circumstances. When the sun's shining, it generates 5 kilowatts. In 1 hour, it produces 5 kilowatt hours, because a kilowatt hour is, I think I have a slide behind. Yeah, a kilowatt hour is 1 kilowatt for 1 hour. It's a bit like miles per hour, but it's a bit different too. So does that make sense? So I feel like the heater example is good. If the heater's rated at, say, 2 kilowatts, that's 2,000 watts, and you use it for 1 hour, it uses 2 kilowatt hours, because 2 kilowatts for 1 hour. That's the difference. And I know that was a bit of a slightly technical diversion, but it's useful for talking about batteries, because batteries are rated in both kilowatt hours and kilowatts. The rated energy in kilowatt hours is how much they can store. The rated power is how much they can provide at any one time. So this battery holds 10 kilowatt hour, but its power rating is 5 kilowatts. And that means it can send out 5 kilowatts of power for 2 hours. Does that make sense? 5 kilowatts times 2 hours is 10 kilowatt hours. It holds 10 kilowatt hours. Again, thinking about a jug, if you've got a liter of water and you pour it out at the rate of 100 mils a minute, then it'll take 10 minutes to pour out the liter of water. That's sort of the analogy. So I hope that sort of helps. It is a bit confusing, but the kilowatt hours is how much it holds. The kilowatts is how much it can give out at any one time. Where this is important is if you had an appliance that used 8 kilowatts, say it was a big air conditioner, then this battery couldn't power that at the full potential, because it can only put out 5 kilowatts at one time. I hope that helps a bit. It is a bit complicated. There's a few other things about batteries. They're sort of rated at their maximum capacity, but often they can only use a bit less. So, this battery, for example, can only use 8 kilowatt hours, even though it's a 10 kilowatt hour battery, because there's always a bit it needs to hold on to. That issue differs with different types of batteries. And there's also, how much does it use on average? That's another feature of its performance. And that's another thing that you've got to think about when you want a battery. How much do I want to be able to get from my battery on average? And how much do I want to be able to go a bit extra if I do? And when you're looking at sizing a battery, you really want to think about how many kilowatt hours do I need? And will the battery hold that many kilowatt hours? Because some people who you have higher energy usage might want a larger battery. And if you've got smaller, you'd want a smaller battery. It does get a bit complicated, so I might skip over that. We can clear that up in questions if there's some questions. There are two types of ways of connecting batteries, called DC coupling and AC coupling. It gets pretty complicated, and I'm not sure that I can really explain it very well. If AJ's there, is there something really useful to talk here, AJ, about AC and DC coupling?
Yeah, so basically what it means is your solar panels will generate electricity in forms of DC. DC means direct current, which means the current is flowing in one single line. So when we say DC couple, it means that your batteries are connected just with the DC, as in the solar panels are producing power and your batteries are connected with that power straight away. When we talk about AC coupling, AC is alternating current, which means the current is flowing in alternatingly positives and negatives, up and down. That's the current that is used by the appliances in your house, that is AC, but solar is being produced by solar panels in DC. So in AC coupling, the battery is connected to an inverter, not to the solar panels directly. So that's basically the difference.
Okay.
Yeah.
And depending on your particular requirements for a battery, sometimes it doesn't really matter if it's DC or AC coupled, and sometimes it does. And that's really information that you need to talk about with the installer to understand what you need for your situation. We can probably find some more detailed information on AC and DC coupling and when you might use what circumstances you might use it in. We could probably share that after this as well. But yeah, this all goes to, you know, batteries are much more complicated. It depends on what you want them for and depends on what your usage is. The economics varies a lot. Not many batteries will pay back their value in 10 years. It depends on the type of battery, and it depends on your usage, and it depends on how prices move. And that's actually moved a bit. I should have edited this actually. That's actually moved a bit recently with the Victorian battery rebate. Actually improves payback time of batteries a little bit. And we see a bit more now payback in less than 10 years. But yeah, it really depends on your situation. What do you use? How much surplus solar energy don't you use? What feed-in tariff can you get? What, you know, what, just, yeah, there's so many things. You know, are you going to get an electric vehicle in the future? If you are, then you probably might not need a battery, because an electric vehicle is a big battery on wheels, right? That's more useful than a battery because it can take you places. The times that we mostly find batteries make sense for people is if they have really high energy usage and they've got time variant tariff where they pay different amounts at different times, and where they've got lots of excess solar, and when they really have trouble shifting their usage. So we certainly see some examples where batteries really make sense for people, but not a lot. And as I mentioned before, if you have a strong need for blackout protection, that's another time when batteries are really useful, more so than the money that they're worth. And here are the numbers on batteries. We've done, AJ ran this analysis based on current costs. How we arrive at these figures is a bit complicated. Basically, we've looked at typical prices for solar systems and for batteries. We've factored in the state government, the Victorian government rebates, where like in the most effective way. So for the solar systems, we've gone, okay, you bought your solar system and you got that $1,850 rebate. And then for the battery systems, we go, no, the battery rebate's higher. So if you got the battery, then you would not get the solar rebate, you get the battery rebate. That's the system cost in that chart, includes all of that. And we looked at different size solar systems, different size batteries, including no battery. That's the zeros is no batteries. These are 3 kilowatt batteries and these are bigger batteries. And we looked at, you know, how much you typically save in a year with that whole system, how long does it take to pay back? And, you know, what equivalent interest rate is that if it was an investment? Because that's one way that people often like to look at solar and battery investments. Is this better than if I put my $3,000 or $10,000 or $20,000 in an investment? And one thing that this chart shows is, I think, that thing that it really depends a whole lot and on the setup that you've got, and also the other issues about your lifestyle and your appliances and your usage, which we haven't really factored much into this. But I think the important thing that this shows is for a 5 kilowatt solar system, which is a pretty typical size these days, without a battery, you've got sort of a 5-year payback. It's like a 20% return on an investment. For the same solar system with a small battery, you still get decent payback. It's still worth it, but it's actually really just extended your payback period, and the equivalent interest rate of investment is less. So the solar really does a heavy lifting when it comes to the value of investing in renewable energy. And we often, the discussion we have with people often is, do you want to spend the extra $4,000 on a battery, or do you want to spend it on more solar panels? Sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes it's no. It depends on, yeah, how big your roof is, you know, what your feed-in tariff is the area that you live in constrained so you can't feed much in. There's a lot of questions. Can you shift load? But it's worth thinking about, you know, again, you really need to sit down with someone and work out the maths of batteries to work out the economic side of it. It's not just about economics. There's all sorts of other reasons that are not just about the money that people want batteries. That's fine. It's always good to know how the numbers stack up, because then if you go, I really want the battery for a bit more energy independence and for blackout protection, what does it cost me to get those things? And am I happy to pay that cost? And in many cases, the answer will be yes. In terms of the environmental benefit of batteries, that's also a bit complicated. Sort of in the short term, for the average household, it's not really an environmental benefit. It's actually a slightly environmental disbenefit because there's losses in charging a battery and discharging it again. It's not that much, but it's a little bit. So on the one level, it doesn't really help the environment just to shift your usage of your solar from one time to another. But there's certain circumstances where it does. If you can't export your extra energy, then the battery does become an environmental benefit because you're using more of the energy than you otherwise could have. And also, if you look longer term, like we talked about early adopters before, even if the battery gives no direct environmental benefit now, more people getting batteries actually supports the industry. And ultimately, we need a lot of batteries and a good battery industry to have 100% renewable grid. So investing in batteries does help with the longer term environmental benefit, not so much in the shorter term in many cases. Like a lot of things, they're complicated. And yeah, if you do want to buy a battery, just do some research, get some advice, look at the specs and learn how to understand the specs. Like, you know, how much does a battery degrade over time? That will affect the value that you can get from it. How long is a warranty for? How long can you expect the battery to last for? We normally sort of say, look, you know, battery could last, who knows how long battery will last for? If the retailer is offering a 10-year warranty, then they're pretty confident it's going to last 10 years. And you can probably base your thinking and your calculations on that. Also, look at how many cycles are warranted. It's usually part of the warranty details. Cycle is how many times the battery completely discharges and then charges up again. Depending on your circumstance, a lot of people only cycle the battery once a day or even less. They might only cycle part of the battery, but in some circumstances, you might cycle it a couple of times. So it's good to find out these specs and try to understand more about them if you're looking for a battery. Now, people are often interested in going off grid. It's less of an issue in the city than sort of in regional areas. We won't really spend too much time on it, but the main thing about going off grid is you need lots more equipment to go off grid, fully off grid, than to be, you know, almost, you know, you can be 90% independent on the grid with a pretty basic system, but to go that last 10% and be completely off grid takes a lot more. You need a backup generator, you need more solar and more batteries to keep you through the coldest and cloudiest winters. You'll need to handle, you know, all your heating and stuff. So going off grid, you really need to do your research before going off grid because it's a big undertaking. The alternative to batteries really are hot water systems. It's just sort of the same thing. It stores the energy. It just stores it as hot water. And it's cheaper than a battery. And, you know, electric heat pump, and even the old fashioned electric resistive hot waters systems actually work really well as storing the energy from your solar generation. I actually think we're going to see a move towards more and more people going back to those old fashioned resistive storage electric hot water because they can soak up heaps of your extra solar for nothing. And they're pretty cheap to purchase and they last for a long time. So hot water is going to be a really interesting space in this role. And especially as we move into the world where increasingly there's too much solar generation for the grid to handle, having some large inefficient appliances like big hot water systems will be a benefit and will help us get towards a more renewable grid. And that's a difficult thing for a lot of us in the sort of sustainability industry to get our heads around. For years, we've been saying, be as efficient as you can. And now we're heading towards a world where sometimes being less efficient is better for everybody. That's a hard one. So that's very interesting around hot water. And yeah, look, you know, maximize your solar consumption. Especially with newer appliances, a lot of them can be run on timers. So you can run your washing during the peak solar period. You can time your heater and air conditioner to cool and heat the house when you're not home, so it's warm or cool when you get there. You can buy, you know, relatively cheap equipment now that can sort of detect how much solar you're generating, send it to your hot water system, etc. If you are buying a battery, think about, here's some of the main things to think about, you know, where you install it, specifying that you want that blackout protection because it needs to be set up a certain way, making sure you've got the right capacity for what you need, checking out the warranty and checking out the warranty conditions. And the summary of batteries really is, as I think has been pretty clear, they're pretty complex. You need to do a lot more homework. You need to get more informed before going into a battery, especially because they're expensive. And the good thing about the way the industry's changed now is that it's less critical that you figure it all out at the same time. It's much easier now to add batteries later to solar than it used to be. a little conversation with your solar installer about what you need to do to make sure a battery can easily be installed in the future is really useful. And my last slide here really is a bunch of resources to find out more about batteries and more general sort of solar advice and energy. And that's pretty much the end of what I've got. So now we're good to go for more questions.
Okay. So let's see, where did you get up to? Yep, all right.
There were a few questions about batteries. So just checking that we did sort of tick off on those. We did have the chart about the payback period for batteries. Yep.
Oh, Gary also asked about the rebate for batteries. So if he's already used a rebate to install solar, then does that mean he's ineligible for a battery?
You can only get one of the rebates. That's correct.
Yeah. Okay, so it's not a rebate per, like you can't get solar 1 year rebate, then next year get a solar batteries rebate.
No,
there's one. That's it.
One in the whole program. You know, who knows what programs how programs might change in the future. But at the moment, no, you can really only get one or the other. And look, you know, we generally think, you know, at the moment, if you're looking mainly at the economic benefit and, you know, getting cheaper bills and also helping the environment, solar is a good way to go. Move my screen. Solar is a good way to go. It's relatively cheap. The rebates are there. It's very useful. The industry is quite mature. You know, we always recommend, you know, the solar rebate is a good no-brainer. It just makes it so much cheaper and increases your payback time. It's a great time to get solar in Victoria at the moment. But the battery, you know, the battery rebate is very generous. And if you really want to go down the battery path, especially if you've already got solar, and like a lot of people have already got solar, and that's really, the battery rebate was designed for people who already had solar. I think you have to have a minimum of size solar system in order to qualify for the battery rebate. I think it's a 5 kilowatt system that you need, which is a pretty average size system these days. And the other thing with the battery rebate, which I glossed over a bit, is that it's got this other requirement that you agree to at least receive information about participating in battery programs and trials. And what these are, they're things that are often called virtual power plants. And these are things that it's a concept that's still being sort of developed and trialed at the moment of households working with a business called an aggregator who works with lots of households to strategically use their solar and battery at certain times of year to like support the energy grid. And these virtual power plant trials are working out what's the best way to do it. They typically give people a bit of a discount to buy a battery, and then they have an agreement which is we're allowed to use this battery, you know, 10 times a year in these circumstances for our virtual power plant. And that's why we're giving you the rebate, so we get to use that. There's a few different ways of doing it, but it is one of the ways of the future as the grid becomes, as we get more what they call variable energy on the grid, more solar and wind, both big scale, you know, on the grid, as well as small scale on people's houses. It does make the energy supply more variable, and it needs a bit more organizing to sort of smooth stuff out. And these programs where they use people's solar and battery with an agreement to help smooth out those fluctuations is probably going to be a basic, you know, in 20 years time, that'll just be a basic thing that we all understand and don't have any issues with. At the moment, it's a bit of a learning curve. We're sort of going, hold on, isn't it mine? Why can somebody use my thing? So that's a big change that we're going through at the moment, I think.
Okay. There's a question from LJS. So the question is, do you think community scale neighbourhood batteries will prove useful in inner urban areas like Moonee Valley due to their economy of scale, or will everyone be better off with their own battery?
I think community scale batteries will be much better for everybody than everybody having their own battery. But we're still the system to support that though is still sort of in train, I guess. At the moment, just the way the energy system works and the energy market rules, they don't really support community batteries in a way that's actually sort of cost effective. And that's to do with how network charges are levied, and there's no mechanism for, you know, network charges are average across everybody, right? If you live in Essendon, you pay, you know, the same network charge as someone who lives out on the outskirts of Melbourne, who sort of, you know, there's actually more cost to get electricity to the person on the outskirts of Melbourne than the person on the inside, right in the middle. But the network charges sort of average across everybody to make it fair. That means that if you're using energy off a community battery at the moment, you sort of need to pay the network charge as if it was coming from the Latrobe Valley, which sort of takes away the benefit of having these local community batteries that really don't use much network. But there's a lot of work at the moment in the sort of the national energy policy space around how do we change network charging so that people can use community batteries effectively free of charge for network costs, so that they can actually use them for the benefits that they could. So sorry, that got a bit complicated. But the short answer is absolutely, it's a great opportunity at the moment. There's a bunch of trials at the moment working out how could we use community batteries. Some of those have been done by sort of community organizations, some have been done by energy networks because they're interested in it too. And I think we'll see a lot more both of community-owned batteries and also network-owned batteries where they use local batteries to manage their sort of network security to enable more solar panels to connect as well. And yeah, certainly the economics are better for larger batteries. They're getting better for large batteries than smaller batteries. So I really think we'll see a future where there's a mix of some people have their own batteries because it really suits them, and other people will sort of interact with community batteries. And I think it will end up being the case where you're not even necessarily doing it consciously or even that aware of it. It'll just be the way the system works, that we have batteries around the neighborhoods that sort of soak up excess when there's too much, feed it back in when there's sort of more higher demand and that sort of thing. And that will really make a difference to the cost and the stability of our energy supply.
Okay. I can't see any additional questions unless I've missed some, but I think while we still have a few minutes left, if anyone has any last minute questions, please, yeah, just type them into the chat function.
Okay, question from
Here we go.
Peter. This is a question.
Here we go.
Sorry, I'm looking at the questions too. This is a question for AJ, I think. Do solar batteries use lithium? If so, with an increase in electric vehicles, will this potentially lead to higher prices for batteries in the future?
So they do use lithium. Lithium is highly dense material when it comes to storing energy. So that's why lithium has been being used over the last few decades. Lead acid batteries were much more popular before lithium came into the scene, but lead acid batteries, they were not as dense in storing energy, so they were very heavy and very big in size. But the thing is, as more and more technology is getting battery based and lithium is being used, the price of the actual lithium cells has come down, but the other costs involved in manufacturing of batteries and transportation and logistics, they have not come down, because of which everyone expected a downfall in the overall prices of lithium batteries, but that downfall is not as steep as we thought. So it's quite gradual, and we are expecting actually for the battery prices to go down, but at a slow pace. Yeah.
I think the other interesting thing with the sort of the nexus between electric vehicles and household batteries is that they sort of overlap, right? Like an electric vehicle sitting in a garage is sort of a household battery. And there's this thing called, which is abbreviated to V2G, which is vehicle to grid technology, which is sort of, again, something that's sort of coming, I think, in the electricity market and in the technology, which would let you use the battery in your car to power your house when you don't need to use it for driving. So you can actually use your car, your electric vehicle, as a home battery, probably instead of having a home battery. And because an electric vehicle is a much bigger battery than the typical ones that you buy for your house. So I think it's going to be very interesting how home batteries and network batteries and community batteries and grid scale batteries interact with electric vehicles of different shapes and sizes. And there's a lot of speculation about exactly how that will go, but it's all just informed guesswork, really, because it's going to depend on things like, yeah, the way those cost curves change and the way the other technology develops, and also just the way that people think of it and can change the way that they do things.
Yeah, sorry, just want to add one thing because of this one experience with another client. So sometimes when you try to buy an EV, they might try to sell it by saying, hey, you can have a vehicle to grid, a vehicle to house, you can transfer the energy, but still we don't have the legislation around that in Australia. But we are hoping in the next few years that will develop. And yeah, that way we'll be able to legally discharge the car batteries into our house or to go to the grid.
Yeah, one of the issues with how the energy system is in Australia is that, you know, as you probably know, it's sort of largely privatized, and it's all powered by all sorts of, you know, all this regulation that underlies it, and the change that's needed in those rules and regulations to allow stuff to happen takes a long time. It's frustratingly slow to get these basic changes, and the technology develops much quicker than the rules can keep up with it. And that's, you know, I've involved quite a bit in sort of policy development and discussions with regulators and rule makers and that sort of stuff, and everybody's always saying we need to work out a system to make these rule changes quicker, so that, you know, so that they actually come into power in time for the stuff that they need to govern. And there's a lot of efforts to sort of look at, you know, technology roadmaps and stuff like that, cost curves, etc., to go, when will we need these regulations, and let's start early. Unfortunately, it doesn't happen that simply. It takes a long time. It can take years for a rule change to come in. And that's one of the things for, like, you know, someone asked before about this proposal that included charging people for exporting solar. There was a bit of concern out in the world about, oh, am I going to start to be charged for my solar? And it's like, don't worry, it's going to take years before this is finally settled. So whatever happens, you've got plenty of lead time before you need to deal with it. And, you know, probably by the time it does happen, there'll be far less solar exports because people will be using them more for, you know, all electric homes and electric vehicles and other stuff, these virtual power plants and things.
Okay, well, I think we've answered all the questions. Unless anyone has anything else. So I'm just scrolling through to make sure that we've covered all the questions.
Yeah, I think we've pretty much covered enough, haven't we?
Yeah, I think we have too.
Sorry, if there's nothing, can I add one more thing, Dean?
Yeah, of course.
So sometimes people have this problem when you ask an installer that I want a blackout protection. Sometimes the installers don't understand you fully, and there's a communication gap. So there are two different kinds of blackout protection. One is something that you automatically get whether you ask for it or not, which means when the grid goes down, there's a power outage, and the solar system will shut down, and you will be able to use whatever charge is there in your battery bank. So that's the normal blackout protection that you will get. But if, let's say, you are living in the outer suburbs and there are a lot of power outages happening, and you want a blackout protection in which your solar system keeps running, but it does not feed anything into the grid. So you will have to ask your installer specifically for that kind of blackout protection, where your solar system will keep running, it will keep providing some kind of energy, maybe to all the loads or maybe only to critical loads, depending on what kind of size it is for your solar system. And yeah, so there are two different kinds of blackout protection. Please be careful when you try to achieve that. Thanks.
Yeah, that's really important information. So I didn't know that. So we should talk more. That's really interesting. Yeah.
All right. Well, on that note, it's almost 1:40. So I'd like to thank both Dean and AJ for delivering this presentation today. As always, I feel like every time I hear this presentation, I learn something new, which is great. So thanks again for your time, and thank you everyone for joining us. Thanks for the clap, Jin. And yes, as I said in my introduction, we'll be making this available on our YouTube channel, but I will send the link to everyone that's registered in case people, and because I know some people had to leave early. So once again, thank you. And all the best. Thanks again, Dean and AJ.
And thanks for having us, Diana,
Okay.
and thanks everyone for coming along. It's really good to have these, to talk about this stuff and to have these discussions and questions. It's what we're here for, so we really appreciate it. Thank you.
That's right. Okay, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.